Part pierwsza. Day 1194 of the war. The world stands at a dangerous crossroads again, with tension not just across battle lines, but in the meeting rooms where the future of Europe is being rewritten. Late last night, the New York Times published a confidential report, documents obtained from Berlin that, according to sources, could redefine not only Ukraine's defense strategy, but the entire balance of security across the continent. At first glance, it might seem like another diplomatic paper shuffle, but insiders say these texts mark a pivotal turning point. For the first time, Europe, backed by the United States, may be ready to commit its own soldiers on Ukrainian soil. The Russian reaction, predictably, was furious. But behind every line of that outrage hides something deeper, a sense that the war may be reaching an irreversible stage. For months, talks about security guarantees were dismissed as symbolic. Now, they're real. The documents reviewed by American and European officials outline the framework of a new military presence, the scale of which has not been seen since the Cold War. The centerpiece, an 800,000-strong Ukrainian army, and the possible deployment of European forces under a separate, non-NATO banner. Washington would provide intelligence, logistics, and oversight. Officially, all of this is described as a peace support mission. Unofficially, everyone understands what it means. The West preparing for the long haul.
Yet this remains shrouded in uncertainty. The Kremlin has already vowed to resist by any means necessary. Donald Trump, back in Washington, is reportedly drawing up a new sanctions package, one that could target Russia's entire energy sector if Moscow refuses to enter a peace framework. Meanwhile, Russia's own rhetoric continues to harden. Officials there insist they'll pursue their objectives through force, confident that time and exhaustion will erode Western unity. And that unity is already being tested. The question of frozen Russian assets, hundreds of billions of dollars sitting idle in European depositories, has split the EU right down the middle. Belgium, Hungary, and Slovakia are pushing back against using those funds for Ukraine's reconstruction. Behind their hesitation lies pressure from two sides: the Kremlin's veiled threats and the quiet influence of Trump's inner circle, which still sees a potential deal with Moscow as a diplomatic victory. Yet, legal experts insist, Russia has no real claim. Having withdrawn from most international conventions, it has effectively removed its own right to sue. Still, intimidation works. Reports suggest that Belgian politicians and executives at Euroclear have received threats traced to Russian intelligence operations, a chilling reminder that hybrid warfare isn't just waged with drones and missiles. On the battlefield, things remain brutal.
Ukraine's forces, stretched thin but unbroken, are repositioning west of Sievieresk after a difficult withdrawal. The General Staff reports new strikes deep in Russian-occupied territory, targeting refineries, ammunition depots, and fuel bases. In the Rostov port, a tanker burns, sending plumes of smoke visible for kilometers. Officially, Russian media calls it an accident. Unofficially, everyone knows the reach of Ukrainian drones is expanding. The same night, explosions rocked the Slavyansk refinery in Krasnodar Krai and the Mykolaiv oil base in Rostov Oblast. Kiev's command says these strikes are part of a strategy to disrupt Russia's supply lines ahead of winter, a tactic that's proving increasingly effective as precision weapons arrive from European allies. Meanwhile, humanitarian struggles deepen. In Odessa, tens of thousands remain without power days after massive drone strikes on critical infrastructure. Local authorities say full restoration could take a week or more. Hospitals run on generators, volunteers deliver water, and the mood in the city is one of defiance, weary but unbroken. "We've survived worse," one resident tells Radio Liberty. Still, the sense of siege persists. Russia's missile campaign continues to target energy systems, not armies, trying to freeze Ukraine into submission. And as those attacks intensify, so too do the calls for more international aid. As political maneuvering unfolds in Berlin, Washington, and Brussels, the soldiers on the ground fight a war that feels far from over. The promises of security guarantees and peace frameworks sound distant compared to the reality of trench mud, cold nights, and the whirring of drones above. And yet, these decisions, the ones made behind closed doors, may soon decide whether Ukraine stands alone or not. Subscribe if you haven't already. The next minutes of this story will reveal the full scope of these new security documents, the dramatic reaction in Moscow, and how the United States plans to force the Kremlin's hand through sanctions that could change everything. Don't miss it. What's coming next could reshape not just this war, but the future of Europe itself. Part 2. The documents that the New York Times reviewed are unlike anything previously disclosed. Two agreements, one general and one operational, outline what Western officials are now quietly calling a new architecture of deterrence in Eastern Europe. The first document sets forth the political principles, an assurance to Kiev that any renewed Russian attack would trigger an immediate collective response from participating states. In tone and content, it mirrors Article 5 of NATO's charter, but with subtle differences. This coalition would not act as NATO, thereby avoiding a formal alliance confrontation. Instead, it would exist as a joint European-Ukrainian force, reinforced by U.S. intelligence and logistics. The second document, far more detailed, describes step-by-step coordination mechanisms between Ukrainian and European forces, contingency protocols for potential Russian violations, and the precise circumstances under which Western aircraft and missiles could be deployed. It reads less like diplomacy and more like a war plan. According to U.S. officials cited by the Times, the primary goal is to ensure that Russia cannot regroup or attempt another invasion in the coming years. The plan foresees Ukraine maintaining an army of 800,000 troops, a number meant not only to secure its borders, but also to serve as a deterrent force integrated with European units. The idea, European diplomats say, is to place smaller contingents of European troops in western Ukraine, far from active combat zones, where they would guard logistics hubs, airspace, and maritime routes. These troops would symbolize long-term Western presence and commitment, making any future Russian escalation far more costly. Washington's role, while less visible, would be decisive. American satellites, drones, and reconnaissance systems would feed Kiev with real-time intelligence, while the Pentagon would monitor compliance with any ceasefire. In practice, this would create a hybrid security structure, with Western nations effectively sharing control over parts of Ukraine's defense infrastructure. Officially, the U.S.
administration insists that no NATO soldiers will participate directly in combat. Yet sources close to the negotiations say that F-35 jets, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and other long-range systems could be used from bases in Poland, Romania, and Germany in case of renewed Russian offensives. A senior European diplomat described it bluntly. If Russia strikes again, the response will come from the air, fast and devastating. This conditional deterrence clause, though unofficial, is understood to be central to Ukraine's confidence in the deal. For Washington, it's a delicate balance, keeping deterrence credible without triggering open war. At the same time, the plan is meant to encourage Ukraine toward a painful political compromise. The essence of that compromise, according to the Times, involves renouncing NATO membership and accepting a form of territorial status quo. The trade-off: guaranteed Western protection and reconstruction funding. It's a bitter pill, and one that Kiev has not formally accepted. President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking at a press conference in Kiev, acknowledged that each country already understands its role in this new framework, adding that some are ready to share intelligence, others are prepared to deploy troops. His words were cautious but telling. Ukraine knows that survival may now depend not only on courage, but on how far its allies are willing to go. In Moscow, the reaction was predictably sharp. The Kremlin spokesperson called the idea of European troops in Ukraine a direct provocation, while state media rushed to declare that Russia will not tolerate foreign forces near its borders. Yet even as Moscow issues threats,
the truth is that Russia's capacity to respond militarily is stretched thin. Reports from the front indicate severe shortages of ammunition and equipment. Still, propaganda continues to paint a picture of strength. During the Defense Ministry's annual meeting, Minister Andrei Belousov announced that Russia will not stop and intends to continue its so-called special military operation through 2026 and beyond, citing plans to expand operations toward Sumy and Kharkiv. President Vladimir Putin echoed those words, reaffirming that Russia's historical territories include all of Ukraine. The rhetoric leaves little doubt. Moscow is preparing for a prolonged confrontation, while the West is building structures to contain it. But not everyone in the West is aligned. Within the European Union, a fierce internal struggle is underway over how to fund Ukraine's defense and reconstruction. The proposed reparations credit, a massive €210 billion program backed by frozen Russian assets, has stalled. Belgium, Hungary, and Slovakia have blocked consensus, citing fears of Russian retaliation and legal uncertainty. Belgium's Prime Minister Alexander De Croo warned that touching Russia's central bank funds could lead to permanent consequences. Yet independent legal analysis, including those by Covington and Burling and the Kiev School of Economics, conclude that Russia has virtually no chance of winning a legal case in any European jurisdiction. Russia's withdrawal from key international treaties effectively nullifies its standing in Western courts. Still, intimidation has proven effective. According to The Guardian, Belgian financial leaders and Euroclear executives received direct threats from Russian intelligence-linked operatives. Among them was Valeria Urba, Euroclear's CEO, who reportedly requested police protection after repeated harassment. Behind these legal and diplomatic disputes lies a deeper strategic struggle. The United States, under Trump's leadership, is said to be preparing a new wave of sanctions targeting the shadow fleet transporting Russian oil and the traders facilitating those shipments. These sanctions, according to Bloomberg, could be unveiled within days if Moscow rejects the Berlin peace framework. European officials privately hope that such pressure will push the Kremlin towards negotiations, but skepticism is growing. As one senior diplomat told Politico, "We are dealing with a regime that only understands force. Sanctions are not punishment, they are communication." While the chancelleries debate, the war continues to tear through Ukraine's cities. In Rostov, the tanker Valery Gorchakov still burns, a grim reminder of how far the conflict's reach has extended. In Zaporizhia, guided bombs destroyed residential buildings and schools, injuring more than 30 civilians, including children. In Odessa, an entire district remains without electricity, with thousands relying on generators and volunteers for water and heat. The humanitarian cost is staggering. According to local authorities, over 500,000 homes in Odessa region have been partially restored, but thousands more may remain dark until after Christmas. The regional administration has declared a state of emergency, and fuel reserves are being redirected to hospitals and emergency shelters. Every night, drones return. Every morning, cleanup begins again. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian defense industry continues to fight back, not only on the battlefield, but in production halls. The Ministry of Defense announced a new partnership with Germany to manufacture 200 Bogdana self-propelled artillery systems, valued at €750 million. These will be built on Mercedes-Benz Zetros chassis and integrated into Ukraine's artillery brigades. The Bogdana, developed domestically, has already become a symbol of Ukraine's industrial resilience. With this new contract, Kiev is on track to produce more self-propelled artillery than all NATO countries combined. At the same time, Daimler Truck confirmed delivery of over 200 logistics vehicles, further strengthening Ukraine's mobility. This industrial cooperation demonstrates a critical shift. Europe is no longer merely arming Ukraine, it is co-producing with it. Yet, as Ukraine builds, Russia burns through resources. Intelligence reports suggest that the Russian economy, strained by sanctions, faces a severe contraction in 2026. Oil revenues are falling, while military spending has surpassed 40% of the national budget. Inside the Kremlin, fears are growing that prolonged war could trigger social unrest. Putin's answer is predictable: tighten control, expand mobilization, and prepare for confrontation with NATO by 2030, as Belousov declared. Analysts mock the claim, noting that Moscow's army is already depleted, yet the propaganda persists. "We are preparing for defense," said Belousov, though his own figures contradict the notion. Russia, unable to conquer Ukraine in 3 years, now insists it is ready to fight the entire alliance in 5. At the same time, Europe braces for the possibility of further escalation. Baltic states have confirmed that Russian troops in Belarus number only a few thousand, not the hundreds of thousands claimed by disinformation campaigns. Lithuania's defense ministry publicly debunked viral reports of 360,000 Russian soldiers massed in Belarus, calling them deliberate psychological warfare. Such incidents, officials warn, are designed to sow panic and undermine trust in Western media. It's another reminder that in this war, the battle for truth is as critical as the one fought with weapons. The first part of this report left us at the threshold of something immense. Now we stand inside it. Europe is no longer a passive observer. It is becoming an actor. Ukraine, despite fatigue and devastation, remains a fortress of resistance. Russia, defiant yet weakening, seeks new ways to intimidate. And the United States, divided between confrontation and caution, weighs the cost of leadership. But the real story is still ahead. The third part will reveal the hidden struggle inside Europe, between those who want to strike now and those who still hope to talk, and the personal stories behind the headlines, from soldiers in Kupiansk to a Ukrainian woman who testified in The Hague about the crimes of occupation. Stay tuned and subscribe. The next segment brings the full human dimension of this global conflict and the consequences that will shape the years to come. Part 3. The battle lines across Ukraine may seem static to the untrained eye, but what unfolds beneath the surface is a relentless grind of attrition, courage, and deception. In the east, the defense of Sievieresk has entered its final chapter. Ukrainian units, having held the line for months, are now regrouping on higher ground west of the city. Military analysts describe this as a tactical withdrawal meant to preserve lives and reinforce stronger defensive positions around Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. For the soldiers leaving the shattered streets of Sievieresk, it is not defeat but survival. They know that the city, now mostly ruins, will soon become another Russian symbol of liberation, just like Bakhmut or Mariupol. Empty words for empty cities. Yet even as Russian troops move in, their advance remains slow and costly. Each kilometer is contested by drones, mines, and artillery. Every new trench dug in Donetsk or Luhansk means dozens of lives lost on both sides. In Kupiansk, the fog of war has turned into a theater of misinformation. The Russian Ministry of Defense triumphantly declared full control over the city, parading maps and footage of soldiers supposedly patrolling its streets. But within hours, open-source investigators proved that the videos were filmed 20 kilometers away, in a Russian village far behind the front. It was another layer of propaganda, an illusion designed for domestic audiences. The reality is far grimmer. Russian units remain trapped in pockets east of the Oskil River, cut off from supplies, and under constant drone surveillance. Ukrainian forces have mastered the art of aerial reconnaissance, striking convoys before they even reach the front. Kupiansk has become a graveyard for armored columns, one Ukrainian officer told The Economist. The Russians, he said, send a platoon a day and none return. Even in the face of such brutal warfare, the absurdity of Moscow's propaganda continues. During a televised meeting with Vladimir Putin, Defense Minister Andrei Belousov presented a map showing supposed territorial gains, but analysts quickly spotted glaring errors. Villages were misplaced by dozens of kilometers. Some captured settlements were in fact still firmly under Ukrainian control. When confronted by journalists, the ministry simply doubled down, calling the discrepancies visual adjustments. The manipulation is so blatant that even Russian military bloggers, once loyal, now ridicule official briefings. They joke that the only safe Russian advances are on PowerPoint slides. Yet behind the irony lies tragedy. As Ukrainian defenders fight on, Russian society reveals deeper cracks. Stories of abuse, corruption, and desperation among returning soldiers multiply each week. One particularly haunting case emerged from Krasnodar Krai. A war veteran, wounded and recovering, was drugged and robbed by his own family members, who stole his life savings of over 2 million rubles. Local police opened an investigation, but as journalists noted, such crimes have become disturbingly common. Veterans, many traumatized and abandoned, return to a country that has no place for them. The myth of patriotic sacrifice dissolves quickly once the cameras turn off. And then there are the stories from the other side. Stories that remind the world why Ukraine fights. In The Hague, Alyona Yahupova, a resident of Kamyanka Dniprovska, gave chilling testimony before the International Criminal Court. She recounted her abduction, torture, and months of enslavement by Russian troops during the occupation of Zaporizhia region. According to her account, she was beaten, electrocuted, and threatened with execution for refusing to collaborate. "They made me dig trenches," she said, "and they told me I was their property." Yahupova's story is one among hundreds being documented by international investigators. Her testimony, corroborated by medical records and other witnesses, forms part of a growing body of evidence that could lead to war crimes indictments against Russian officers. "This is not just about me," she said in her closing statement. "It's about every woman who survived." For Ukraine, these personal accounts are as powerful as any weapon. They remind the world that this war is not a geopolitical abstraction, but a struggle for human dignity. Each story exposes the reality behind the Kremlin's euphemisms. Special operation means occupation, denazification means torture, and liberation means rape. International organizations, from Amnesty International to Human Rights Watch, continue to gather evidence, though the wheels of justice turn painfully slowly. The International Criminal Court has already issued arrest warrants for several Russian officials, including members of the FSB, involved in deportations and forced labor. Yet few expect them to face trial soon. Justice, like victory, is still distant. While the moral battle rages, the strategic one intensifies. Western intelligence confirms that Russian industry is collapsing under the weight of sanctions. Factories producing drones and artillery shells face shortages of microchips and materials. The ruble remains unstable despite state intervention. Inflation is eroding living standards, while the Kremlin continues to pour billions into military contracts. Economists in Moscow quietly admit that 2026 could bring the worst fiscal crisis since the 1990s. Still, propaganda frames hardship as patriotism. Billboards across Russian cities show smiling soldiers above slogans like "Work for Victory" and "The Motherland Needs You." In reality, these posters mask a country sinking into fear. Inside the European Union, fatigue and fear clash with determination. 7 member states, Belgium, Hungary, Slovakia, Italy, Bulgaria, Malta, and the Czech Republic, have blocked the reparations credit initiative. Officials in Brussels warn that this could fracture EU unity for years. Some leaders, like Belgium's Prime Minister, invoke legal caution. Others, like Viktor Orban and Robert Fico, act out of open sympathy for Moscow. Yet most European nations remain resolute.
Germany and France are pushing for a qualified majority vote that could bypass the veto, even if it risks a constitutional crisis within the Union.
This is the moment of truth, said one EU diplomat. Either we defend our values or we become spectators of our own decline. Meanwhile, the United States debates how far to go. Trump's administration, while maintaining support for Ukraine in rhetoric, has slowed the approval of several aid packages. Officials in Washington insist this is procedural, but insiders describe a deeper hesitation, a belief that pushing Russia too hard could backfire. The Pentagon, however, continues to expand logistical cooperation with Kyiv, delivering surveillance data and planning new sanctions against the Russian oil fleet. A senior American official summarized it bluntly: "If Putin doesn't want peace, we'll make war too expensive for him to afford." On the humanitarian front, the crisis in Odessa remains emblematic of Ukraine's resilience. Entire neighborhoods function by generator power, with volunteers delivering fuel, medicine, and food. "We've learned to live with darkness," says a local doctor, "but not with surrender." The regional government has declared energy repair crews national heroes. Across the country, crowdfunding campaigns for the army multiply daily. Civil society remains the backbone of Ukraine's survival. From drone parts to medical kits, every donation becomes an act of resistance.
And yet, beyond strategy and suffering, a larger truth is emerging. Europe is no longer debating whether the war matters. It is accepting that this conflict defines its era. The new security architecture being forged in Berlin and Washington is not a temporary response. It is the blueprint of a new world order. A Europe that places soldiers on Ukrainian soil, even under non-NATO flags, is a Europe that has crossed a historic threshold. The United States, too, faces a reckoning, whether to retreat into isolation or lead the defense of democracy once again. For Russia, this transformation is a nightmare. Putin's speeches grow longer, his promises emptier. At the Defense Ministry's year-end meeting, he spoke of historical lands, buffer zones, and inevitable victory. Yet his generals look increasingly weary. Leaked reports suggest rising desertion rates, declining morale, and internal investigations into corruption. The once feared war machine is running on fumes. "We are fighting on momentum," one Russian officer anonymously told Novaya Gazeta Europe. If the war stops, the system collapses. As winter deepens, the front lines freeze, but the diplomacy does not. Negotiations over the Berlin framework continue.